decided I had to get out of Athens for a while. You know how it goes, and went to grad school at University of Arizona, and it was like a completely different setting. And I get there, and there's the desert everywhere, and then one of the first people I meet is Steven, and he has this amazing Southern accent that just made me feel right at home. And I think there was a lot of us Southerners there. And when you hear Steven read, he's actually got an essay about his voice that's really amazing. It was in Story South. But yeah, he's just a great guy. He immediately we became friends, and then just recently, I guess about a year or so, 2 years ago, he got a job at UGA teaching. So then now he's an Athenian, part of the Athens literary scene. And what we really do with Newtown Revue, if any of you are new to it, we're trying to promote Athens writers, because a lot of us are kind of secret here, and we like to let you get to know who our writers are. And Steven's one of our best. So he's let's see, what else do I want to say? He's had lots of stories published in great places, etc. But he's a great guy. He's also a musician. So after he reads his essay, he's gonna play awesome music. So this is Steven Brooks.
So I actually brought a prop I should pass out here. We'll pass these around. A little diagram that'll come in handy here now. So this essay that I'm going to read is it's called Voices Southern, or Voices Southern, depending on however you read the title. As a writer and teacher and singer and human being, much of my life depends on manipulating my voice, the flowing air, both real and imaginary, through my own passageways, some hot, some cold, and in the classroom hopefully directing my words into students' brain receptors, telling them stuff to improve their own voices through their written words, voice on the page, voice as ink and text. Some voices are comfort, some pain, old friends and enemies, lovers and freckle-faced strangers. I can hear them vibrating inside my head. We orient to one another through our voices, gauging rhythms, gaining bearings. It takes a while to learn when someone is likely to speak, at what volume. And in the pauses between the interlocutor's turns, if there are pauses, something weird is going on. Let's consider these pictures for a moment, ones I just passed out. We'll come back to this, maybe. What's the gap between thought and language, between language and thought, and between thinking something but not saying it? Where does a voice reside within a steamy chamber of bones and blood? What happens to voices that aren't used? How fleeting are they? What is a voice? Where is it born? I'm blessed with a thick southern accent, and somewhat cursed because I can be weird about it. The dialect that I speak is found mainly in North Alabama and has a sandy mix of Floridian. Every once in a while someone thinks I'm British. I haven't come close to figuring this one out yet, although I did have a decent Liverpool accent in my middle school days with Beatles' obsession in Florida, and used it often, sometimes reading Charles Dickens aloud in class this way. Once, while reading from Oliver Twist, came upon a passage involving one Master Bates. Sometimes I'd slip and pronounce a word with a Liverpool inflection, not meaning to, when a buddy asked me what variety of warmed-over cardboard-flavored pizza I was going to wash down with Hawaiian punch, let's say. In those days I was known as Big Country, or just Country, a name I acquired on the basketball court. I was tall, skinny, and country. Going back to my earliest days, I can remember my fellow Alabamians saying, "Man, that Brooks, his accent's thick," in their own ways with little childhood and early pubescent voices. And so it was. I recognized this from these encounters, but had no sense of my own voice, unless I happened to hear it on an answering machine or a tape recorder, which I tended to carry around, sometimes making mock interviews as both interviewer and interviewee, sometimes just creating a record of my existence, of what I was doing or thinking, or how the wind felt on my skin, of swallowing sunlight and soaking up what I could through the tops of the trees, with the water gurgling and the flowers blooming and the pollen floating. Accent's thick, but what of it? This is a question I've wondered about all my life. Does it mean anything? People can take it to mean all sorts of things before they get to know me, and probably after on a purely superficial level. And we all play something in this game with voices, it seems. They're our first chance at getting to know each other and figuring out where the hell are you from, which we're all strangely curious about. Some of the first questions that are inevitably asked upon meeting someone for the first time are geographical, even where you work. Perhaps it's our hope that we might find the least common denominator to share in. Maybe we've gone to the same burger joint, or heard about it, or seen the same rocky coast. Maybe this suggests something about our humanity. We're creatures of place, of mountains, streams, and desert, of voices and brooks. When I was very young, just before leaving my hilltop of rambling childhood, where I had 23 acres of 23 acres to roam in the North Alabama wilderness, and spent my earliest years as an only child, I had a voice in my head, which later developed into full-blown obsessive compulsion after moving to Phoenix City, Alabama, and Marianna, Florida, during my exodus, my father's exodus, of which you'll hear more about as my life burns and flickers. I could hear the voice in my head in these early years, at least I thought so, but I can't describe what that sounded like now. It was like a powerful thought, telling me highly paranoid warnings and tortures that were in store for me if I refused to heed its suggestions, which were the only escapes. I called it the saying, barely aware of its abnormality, because it was so full-blown in my consciousness, so pronounced. It was a whispery enemy, one that always haunted me. Saying says something bad will happen if I don't perform some routine task like holding my fingers on the light switch for a certain number of seconds. Was the form it usually took. I tell my folks about this. Something bad will happen to your father if you don't wait a few seconds before leaving the room. Your mother will die and you'll be left all alone in a pit of smashed glass. To this day, I don't know what my progenitors thought was going on with me. Their way of dealing with the saying was of not dealing, of denial, and laughing it off. But the saying said it was coming, some miniature apocalypse, always. Looking back, I think this lousy creation, or condition, this voice, was my way of dealing and not dealing with leaving my home and all I'd ever known. And in some way, I could sense a change in my father. He wasn't happy anymore. He lost a job he'd held for 16 years in a tire manufacturing plant in that economic depression of the early 90s, and the echoes of bombshells bursting in the Gulf War and the laughter on Saturday Night Live. The homestead he'd secured for us, right down the road from Granddaddy Bill's, and the 86 acres my father had grown up on, was lost as well. Maybe this was enough to tickle the saying up in my consciousness, become my dark puppeteer. I got rid of it along with the OCD for the most part, halfway through high school. Logical reasoning did the trick. My self-diagnosis, treatment, prescription for a less murderous black cat of my own. I fought against this voice for years. Today there are different voices inside of me that speak through characters' voices in creative writing. In my years of academic writing, a different voice rang, one that I wanted to make genuine. I carry all these voices around inside as I carry the voices of those who I've known well. Voices are born and some voices die, down in my depository, a windy abandoned warehouse with cracked windows that clack and echo. Sometimes my speaking voice is deep, sometimes almost squeaky. In the classroom, I generally talk deeper and louder than I do in the sunshine. I'm more aware of the sound and volume of my voice than ever before, which isn't saying much. My skull always twisting and distorting myself to me. Skulls have a way of doing this. My students sound Southern to me now, and I probably sound muddledly Southern compared to how I once spoke, having spent the last 2 years in Tucson, Arizona, where my voice has changed significantly, though slightly, it feels. Before long, now that I'm teaching at the University of Georgia, my accent will thicken. I'm sure it already is. Right now, it's developing a new tendril as I sit here in my office, typing, hearing a fellow teacher's loud voice through the door, and now while I put in my earplugs, that tendril is growing tiny tendrils of its own. Soon I'll say fur instead of for, year instead of your, dutn't for didn't, it for isn't. Perhaps our accents are nothing more than products of taking in a note from everyone else's voice that we hear, striving for some far-gone, least common denominator of sound. Somehow it seems our voices, like us, are always thirsty for change. As a teacher, I encourage the best students to start experimenting with voice. This is my way of saying, find a way to break the gelatinous mold of standard written English, whatever preconceptions you have about it. Find a way to get your voice in there and filter your subject matter through it. Find a way to harness your creativity, because I know you have it in you. I can see your voice in glimpses on the page. I see it, read it, hear it. I found students to be very sensitive to criticism at times, and this puzzled me for a while, until I realized that, in a way, I'm paid in part to critique their abilities to use a fundamental part of their consciousnesses, language itself. Within the walls of the hardwood classrooms, the voices of Martin Luther King Jr., James Baldwin, Virginia Woolf, Raymond Carver, and Bob Dylan often sound. What does it take for a voice to become immortal? I talk to people in different voices. My wife has noticed an extreme shift when I speak to Cousin Jeff, a North Alabama native and permanent resident. And I've noticed it too. In the end, and maybe I'm stretching, but I figure I talk to most everyone I know well with a slightly different tenor and intonation. And even with them, sometimes they'll shift into one voice, then another. Voice is anything but constant. Sometimes it builds, sometimes falls apart, takes on new framework, loses old frills and columns. Before I moved to Arizona to finish school and begin my teaching career, an extended family member in Dallas introduced me to someone like this. He doesn't sound smart, but he is, I promise. I can hear her giggle now almost. This is a woman who lives in an elite Dallas neighborhood that's starting to turn less elite, which worries her. She said this after I'd just graduated from Auburn as an undergrad, as we stood awkwardly in a foyer. Basically, all she knew about me was this. I graduated summa cum laude. She was trying to brag on me to somebody, some upper-class frontrunner perhaps, who couldn't help taking a jab, making her comment more of a jab than anything else. I have to wonder how many people think the Southern accent sounds stupid or uneducated. Oh, the South and the things I've heard, that's another essay. And I'm an easy target after all. I'm country. After I lived in Tucson for a year and revisited Dallas, this woman sounded more Southern to me than most anybody back home in Alabama. She'd sounded city-fied, the opposite of country-fried, to my Alabama ears originally. The irony and relativity, stupefying. Another one of these people, an anthropologist and artist, temporarily stationed in Sun City, Arizona, questioned me at the dinner table over wine and cheese last Thanksgiving, intrigued by my origins. So, what did your family do when you were a child? Later, she hopped on an accents database via the internet, trying to pinpoint exactly where my voice had originated, somewhere over in Europe. Luckily, the Alabama versus Auburn football game was on. Californians have told me this after talking to me for a bit. It sounds so casual, real casual. Westerners, in my own narrow experience, are more fascinated and appreciative of my voice than anyone. New Yorkers have the most difficulty understanding me. Some Southerners wish they had more of whatever it is that I have. But it was in Tucson, where most people are from somewhere else, that transient jewel of the Sonoran Desert, that people seem to enjoy my voice. A recording engineer at Wave Lab once told me, every sentence is like one big word. I remember a conversation that I had with a New Yorker after he just moved to Tucson same time as me. The wide open spaces of the desert frightened him, but put me at peace. And there was something important in that difference, back to the oldest distinction of country and town. You could hear this difference in our voices as we spoke, finding common ground and shared polarity. Some people don't think they have an accent, but they're wrong linguistically speaking. While in college, I knew this linguist. She wanted me to talk in class and read aloud so she could listen to my accent with her well-trained ears. It thrilled her. I made an A. Sometimes the inner voice of thought terrorizes me, sometimes champions me, sometimes bores me until I want to spit it out. And I think it goes back to that old demon, the saying from my haunted beginnings. Fear has something to do with using my voice, fear and conquering it. After leaving the hilltop, my father's spoken voice began crackling and sputtering, saying less, as my inner voice began saying more. Some 16 years ago, he has a condition called spasmodic dysphonia. When he speaks, his vocal cords spasm uncontrollably, and this results in his voice coming out as a weak croak, as he calls it, scratchy and sharp. Other times people can't understand him. He's incredibly insecure about it to this day, and can't stand it when people upon meeting him ask, "Something wrong with your voice?" or "You sick?" No shit, he thinks. Isn't it obvious? But it's just too easy to ask. Observing his vocal insecurity over most of my life has almost certainly influenced my own vocal insecurity, which is infrequent but recurrent. Voices are giveaways and not giveaways, scars, band-aids, instruments, and cures. There's nothing built into any sound in itself that has meaning, supposedly. So what do regional accents and voices mean? They are, in essence, meaningless, as are all sounds. But they can mean just as much as the finest music, the most seamless shift from minor to major chord, with the vocal cords vibrating at so many different frequencies, the air passing through cool crystal canyons carved through skull. My singing voice is always changing, sometimes for good, sometimes not, but always toward new land, feeling, and rhythm. And when I play guitar, it's an extension of my voice with mathematical notes that can bend and become not so mathematical, space effects and reverb swirling up in orchestras of pitch and notes. Music is a savior, freedom, my greatest chance at redemption and destruction. I guess it's just that my accent is pronounced, easily called an accent, a noticeable accent through an ever-changing voice, born from the most misunderstood, feared, and cliched land in the country, my beautiful home. Thanks. Thank you, guys. So we're going to play a few songs tonight. And this is Zach Wright. He's a pedal steel player in my band Junker. And we've got a couple shows coming up. One at Caledonia next month with our rhythm section. We have a really loud, super heavy rhythm section, so this is the first for us playing all quiet. We're really excited just to have the opportunity. We just scored a gig at the Melting Point too. I've got some flyers on the table. Links to download our stuff for free if you're interested. So we're going to play a couple new songs tonight. These are the first run. First time we've ever played them in front of anybody. Still working on them with the rhythm section dudes. This was way nobody dreamed I was the only one. Laughing inside of phony parade. Almost forgotten. Scared to remember what it felt like to die. The edges of its light. We'll circle the edges and run. Call me up sometime, we'll see what we can remember. Just around the corner now, somewhere in these transmissions, my heart ain't dead, my hands are still empty. I want some really don't children still believe everything will all be right. Gods and devils work in the story.
Greetings and welcome to everyone who's here tonight. My name is Deirdre Sugiuchi. I'm the co-curator of the Newtown Revue. Here, Stephen and Zach, that was a great performance. Thank you very much. And so having been a seventh generation Mississippi Deltan who assimilated herself out of an accent, wow, I really enjoyed that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was great. The next person that we're on the schedule tonight is Kristen Iskandrian. Am I saying that right? Yes, okay, great. I have a little story about Kristen, which actually has to do with that copy of Tin House magazine that's sitting right there. But basically, this summer I was in Portland, Oregon. I'd gone for a writer's residency, for a writer's conference. And I'd been out there for about a week and a half, and I was pretty, feeling pretty homesick for Athens, and I opened up that copy of Tin House, and I was reading it, and I discovered there was a story I really liked called The Inheritors. And so I went to the back and I looked at the bios about this person, and it turned out to be somebody that lives not very far from my house, and it turned out to be Kristen, who's another writer here in Athens, and she's published quite a few stories in different publications like the Denver Quarterly or the Mississippi Review or the Gulf Coast. She's also an editor, and she also earned her PhD here at the University of Georgia. So I'm very excited to introduce to you guys one of my new favorite writers, Kristen Iskandrian.
Do I not have? Oh, do I? Testing? But I really love that story. That makes me really happy. And it's great to be here. And Stephen, that was an awesome essay and a beautiful song. And I always think it's a little unfair to have a writer follow a musician. That's all I got, But anyway, I'm very pleased to be in such good company. So I'm going to read from that old chestnut in Tin House. And it's a bit of a lengthy story, so I'm going to skip around and hopefully not lose anyone too much. But I'll just say, kind of by way of an overview, that Hello? Oh, there I am. It's about two women and the friendship between them. The story is called The Inheritors, and you know, when writing it, that thing happens. That's like such a great thing that can happen to a writer, where you don't necessarily mean for things to point at a certain center, but they keep doing that, you know, kind of in spite of yourself. And this turned out to be a story that has a lot to do with that idea of ownership and kind of owning things that were never yours to begin with, and I think also belonging as a noun, you know, and then also as a participle, or is it a gerund? No, it's a participle. Okay, so that kind of dual idea of belonging. So I guess that's all you need to know, really. The inheritors. She and I worked together. Oh, and sorry, these characters don't have names, and they're both women, so that's annoying, but hopefully it won't confuse anybody. She and I worked together in a consignment shop called Second Chances, which many people thought was a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen due to the name. The round, convivial font on the sign, the lack of any qualifying tagline, and the part of town it was in. Also, the front windows were thickly curtained, making it necessary to go inside to find out what was inside. In fact, I had gone there initially to inquire about volunteer work, but as soon as I entered, I felt compelled to pretend that there had been no mistake, that I was a bona fide thrifter, and when the owner introduced himself, it seemed inevitable that I would either buy something or ask for a job. The other person in the shop came over from where she had been doing something with safety pins, greeted me curtly, one pin in her mouth, and asked the owner a question about a credenza. Immediately, she reminded me of someone I couldn't place. For weeks after I started working there, having abandoned my plan to achieve some degree of insight about my life through unpaid service to others, she irritated me because she had used the word credenza, but more so because she was familiar in a stubbornly untraceable way. I couldn't look at her without not seeing her, and seeing instead a placeholder, a version of her as she was reflected by my straining memory. Then I realized that it wasn't a person she reminded me of, but a thing depicting a person, and by then the gradations of recall and association had blended into a kind of folkloric confusion to which she, in my mind, remained bound. The thing she reminded me of was a painting that used to hang in my parents' living room of a girl waiting for a train that was approaching from the upper right corner of the canvas. The girl stood with her back to the living room, relieved or frightened, who could know, by the train's imminent arrival, with her wrists poking out from the too short sleeves of her red jacket, one hand white-knuckling the handle of a weathered suitcase, the other stretching itself, fingers spread and pointing downward, as though trying to pull clean of its arm. Her feet were close together and turned slightly inward, and her legs, thick and a bit misshapen, shone whitely where her gray skirt ended. The painter probably wasn't much of an artist. I think my parents bought it at one of those hotel expos, along with a few smeary watercolors and thick gilt frames that hung in the powder and guest rooms. But I always liked this girl and wished I could see her face. And H. Teal, whoever that was, had done a nice job with her hair, a bob that looked womanly somehow, not the flaxen, glistening hair of children, but dusty and heavy, sad hair. The hair and the stance of protracted waiting are what brought her to mind when I thought of the painting, and what brought the painting to mind when I saw her. ... Okay. Both of us liked old things. She liked them as a lifestyle, a matter of ethics. She clung to old things the way I cling to sadness, and she could be emphatic, which could be tiresome. There's just no need for it. This world is choking with stuff, drowning in it. I think there's enough stuff in the world for every single person to have plenty, enough old bikes for every kid in the whole world to have a bike, and enough coats for everyone to have a coat. Buying new, it's pretty much criminal, she said. Everything, and I mean everything in my apartment, is pre-owned. Same here, I said, which wasn't completely true. Except for socks and underwear. That I can't do. She sniffed. Oh. She was sorting buttons and had a large red one between her teeth. That doesn't bother me, she said around the button. In fact, she took the button out. My mom got me a 3-pack of underwear for Christmas last year, and I never opened it. What about your appliances, I asked. My landlord had put in a new refrigerator that year, and I loved it. Its hum was almost melodic, and the freezer made perfect half-moons of ice automatically. Nope, she said, old, old, old. My stove takes 20 minutes to heat up and then burns everything. Please. So, do you want the underwear? I checked to see if she was joking. No, she was not. No, I said, but thank you. She made a face. Fine, she said, moving some buttons around on the counter. It's a shame, though, since you like brand new underwear and everything. At a bar in the early afternoon, she talked about being adopted. That was the first time she'd ever mentioned it, and subsequently it came up a lot, casually and in passing. The owner had told us to close early. It had been a slow day and a slow week. The whole town appeared to be hibernating or shopping in department stores. She took the lack of business personally. No one cares about stories anymore, about history, she said as she counted out the register. The world doesn't want a lampshade that is a lampshade that collects dust and gets dusted every week by a person, maybe an old lady, maybe a divorced man. They want biodynamic lampshades, or lampshades that double as clever hats or wall sconces. She was probably right. Everything did seem newly invested in multifunctionality. My father had a refrigerator with a television built into it, unless it was maybe a television with a refrigerator built around it. I looked about me and everything in the store looked dingy and primitive. Those are pretty, she said. I'll probably buy one. I was folding a stack of tea towels, softening with age. I imagined the Floridian widower's variety, self-cleaning, self-folding. Are these called tea towels? I asked. Tea towels? My voice was high, almost hysterical. It doesn't even sound like English. She looked at me quizzically. It sounds like some old Welsh saying reserved for wedding days, I said. Wedding days during the rainy season. I don't know why I felt this way. Tea towel. That's silly, she said. Tea towel. It makes perfect sense. But why are they called that? Are they only supposed to be used for cleaning up tea? For wiping one's fingers if they get tea on them? Aren't they just fancy dishcloths? What is their meaning? I wanted to stop, but felt unable, and she wasn't cooperating. Seriously, who has the time for tea towels? What's wrong with you? She asked. I don't know. I didn't know. We should drink beer, she said. Do you want to drink beer? It was a nick of time clemency. It was okay with her that we did not share a sense of humor, that she liked to laugh at real things as they happened, and I liked to laugh at imaginary and macabre things that would never happen, that she took most things seriously, whereas I did not, and that these characteristics made each of us occasionally lonely and agitated around the other. I felt grateful, humbled by her forgiveness, and I did my best to leave it at that, without further aggravation for unknowingly having needed it. At the bar, I drank my first beer very quickly. She was only about a quarter way through hers. 2 years ago, she said, I started calling adoption agencies and asking if they had my records. Why didn't you just ask your parents for them? I concentrated on saying every word. The beer made me feel pleasantly out of control. My parents insist that I'm not adopted. They insist that I am their biological child, she said. But I know I'm not. I just know it. How do you know? I was intensely curious. The intensity of my curiosity seemed to me to be worthy of discussion in itself. She took a straw from the plastic cube on the bar that also held cocktail napkins. She stuck it in her beer. After a labored sip, she looked at me closely. I know that I do not biologically belong to my parents. Like if I told you that the bartender was your father, what would you say? I never knew how to answer taunting questions like that. I tried never to ask them. I'd say, no, he's not. But what if I told you I was 100% positive that he was your father, then what would you say? She took another big sip with the straw, and the bartender brought a second beer for me. I kept my head down. I didn't want him to hear us. I made a noise. That man is not my father. My father is on a beach in Florida memorizing the jokes in Reader's Digest. You're making an absurd analogy. If she weren't so convincing, I'd have thought she was crazy for sure, or her convincingness made her a kind of crazy that I envied. What was family, anyway, I mused drunkenly. Skin and cells chafing together, hatching things, and then demanding a loyalty? I wished I had something to prove or disprove, something outlandish. We talked about what our mothers looked like, her saying that she dreamed frequently of hers, her real mother, who looked like Eva Marie Saint, nothing like her pseudo-mother, who was small and dark. I said that my mother's ears never aged, never looked sick. She said something about plaster of Paris and used tete-a-tete incorrectly, and then she paid for our beers and we left, me blurrily driving 20 miles an hour and her singing snippets of songs as the radio scanned from station to station. We watched a lot of television that day into the night. This was, the narrator is at the house of the one who thinks she's adopted. We watched a lot of television that day into the night, and we talked little. I felt strange when I got home. It was after midnight, and my mind was deadened and jittery at the same time from the television and the odd room and the lack of conversation and the inactivity that all combined to create a bizarre but unquestionable intimacy. I was at a loss as to what to do next. I felt like calling her, but I hadn't had much to say in the last 9 hours, and I didn't have anything to say just then. I poured a bowl of cereal and sat eating it, trying to think of something I could call her to talk about. As improbable as it felt, I missed her the way I missed things when I was younger. I looked at the back of the cereal box for a while, and then at some unopened mail that was on the counter, and then eventually brushed my teeth and went to bed. I dreamed that I was drunk and disorderly at a party, and she was there and drunk and disorderly too, and when it came time to leave, it was clear that we were despised by everyone else there, and we couldn't leave fast enough because we were stumbling around looking for my coat, which was my mother's coat, and which I was desperate to find. But drunk, desperate, and therefore filled with conflicting urges to apologize, to redeem myself, to disappear, to kiss the host, to explain the importance of my mother's coat. In the end, I did some combination of all these things, and I awoke feeling mortified, my embarrassment like a hangover. I showered and drank coffee and decided to go to work early, to busy myself and to distance myself from everything of the last 3 quarters of the previous day. By noon, she still hadn't come in. The owner looked displeased when he dropped by to do some paperwork, and he told me to call. You shouldn't be here all by yourself, he said. It's bad for business. We rarely had more than one customer in the store at a time, and no real business to speak of, but I didn't argue. I called her, and she answered on the 5th ring. Hi, she said. Hi, are you sick? There was a pause. A little bit, I think. Her voice got muffled. Chills, but her voice got muffled again. Fine. What? I didn't hear everything you just said. Nothing. I'm fine. Okay, I said. Are you sure? Yes. Do you want me to bring you anything? No, I'll be in tomorrow. Sorry to leave you in the lurch. I owe you one. This character loves idioms like that, like leave you in the lurch and things like that. We hung up, and I told the owner that she would be coming in at 1, and the owner asked if I would be all right by myself until then, since he really wanted to go to an estate sale and scavenge. I'll be fine, I said. Don't worry. I spent the rest of the day in the shop alone, tidying up racks and organizing inventory lists and dealing with 2 people, one older man who wanted to find a hat for his wife but left with nothing and seemed displeased, and one college boy who bought 3 extra small t-shirts that he would wear, I could only guess, ironically. When she didn't come in the next day or the day after and didn't answer the phone when I called repeatedly, forcing the owner, who by then was so flustered he plastered the front door and windows with help wanted signs, giving the shop an unnatural brightness that made everything look more drab. I got begrudging permission to leave on my lunch break and drive to her place. One of her neighbors with the bikes was sitting on the porch. You here for your friend's stuff? The landlord's up there now, but go on in. Oh, I said, trying to not look as puzzled as I felt. Okay, thanks. I went upstairs. Her door was partially open. A thin, middle-aged man in ripped jeans was looking in the refrigerator. He turned and faced me. Broke her lease, just like that, and no forwarding address. Called this morning and left a message saying she'd leave the key and someone would come by for the rest of her things. That's you, I'm assuming? You can tell her that she won't be getting her security deposit back. It looked like most of the phone books were still on top of the fridge. The old radios were gone. She left all of this? It's all yours or it's getting trashed. He looked at me and smiled unkindly. Is she in some kind of trouble? Where'd she go in such a hurry? I kept staring at the phone books. She's not in trouble, I mumbled. I felt sick but also relieved, as though I'd had a fever and it was breaking and I could sit up and drink, as though nausea and recuperation were happening in the same moment, the contrast its own kind of balm. It's her family, I think, some sort of family emergency, she said. I thought to myself, it doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't make a difference. She's gone. She isn't here. She's no longer here. And it felt almost like joy, but not really. The landlord told me to lock the place up when I was done and leave the keys with the neighbors. When he left, I wandered into the other room. The furniture was still there, including the television, and it looked expectant, as if I could turn it on and it would tell me something. I sat on the fold-out couch and turned it on, and there was a soap opera. One woman facing the camera and pouring amber-colored liquid from an ornate decanter into a glass and swirling it, and turning around slowly, deliberately. And another woman with her back to the camera looking out a window and touching the edge of a lace curtain framed by the window and the camera and the gaze of the other woman, and waiting, it seemed, for some cue. Thank you very much.
So it sounds like we've only got time for one more. So play another new tune. How's that? This one's called How I Disappear. Thank you. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. And again, remember Avid is a bookstore, and there's lots of things. I was just sitting there looking if you can purchase while you're here. And thanks, that was lovely. Thank you both, and thanks again, Kristen. That was amazing too. So have a great night.
I'm gonna holler at you guys. We've got our 1-year anniversary coming up in 3 weeks. It's October 20th. It's about 3 weeks. October 20th, we've got this big 1-year anniversary party. And you're all invited to that. Got the bookmark with some details on there for you if you'd like it, but we'd love to see you.
Kristen, I have to tell you, I Googled you and I was thinking of Berkster, and I found this story on your blog about nausea.
Oh, yeah.
That book is there.